So, hello, beautiful people. Now we're gonna cover the parts of the aorta. This is San Sulaiman, and we're gonna cover the three parts of the aorta. So, the first thing is the ascending aorta. So, ascending aorta, as you can see here, begins at the aortic orifice of the left ventricle. Let me decrease the font somehow. Okay, and it corresponds to the beginning of the third left intercostal space, as we can see here. And basically it goes upwards, forwards, and to the right side. Okay, ascends upwards and forwards to the right side. So again, it begins at the aortic orifice of the left ventricle, corresponding to the third left intercostal space. It ascends upwards and forwards to the right side and ends at the level of the second, as you can see here, sternocostal junction. Second sternocostal junction, that's the first. It corresponds to the level of here, the sternal angle. So it's like the sternal angle on the right side, and that's an important key point because we're going to talk about something very important when we go to the next part. Great, to be the aortic arch and continue ascending. Great. The relations of the ascending aorta, that part until here. First thing, the way that it's 5 centimeters, fully covered by the fibrous pericardium and all those stuff. But one thing, we want to talk about the anterior relations. Oh, I'm sorry. For the anterior relations, we can see them here. We can see the pulmonary trunk highlighting, overcoming the highlighting of the aorta. So the first thing is the root of the pulmonary trunk. Great. And the right auricle here of the right atrium, but I really couldn't draw it. That's second thing. The left ventricle was divided into two parts, smooth outflow and rough inflow. Okay, for the smooth outflow part, it was the infundibulum of the left ventricle, as you can see here. Okay, so again, root of the pulmonary trunk, infundibulum of the left ventricle, right auricle. The last thing is the pleura anterior borders of the right. It even has like a tray if that's the right lung. Let's make that more obvious. Okay. The ascending aorta has like a very important impression triangular area between the right border or the anterior border of the right lung and cardiac impression and the superior vena cava impression. So the first thing is the anterior borders of right lung and pleura, root of the pulmonary trunk, right auricle, and the infundibulum of the left ventricle. This is everything. For the posterior relations, as you can see here, I didn't draw the posterior relations, but it's the transverse sinus of the pericardium. Okay, that's absolute sense because what's behind the ascending aorta is the heart. It actually emits from the heart. So what's posterior is the transverse sinus of the pericardium. As you can see here, we can find that the pulmonary artery, the right one, is also from the posterior relations, and it is like separating it from the right principal bronchus. Okay, so again, for the say with me, this will help you memorize. Again, anterior relations, root of the pulmonary trunk, right auricle, infundibulum of the left ventricle. The last thing was the right lung and pleura. Okay, and then for the posterior relations, what were they? Transverse sinus of the pericardium. Great. And then it was the right pulmonary artery separating it from the right principal bronchus. Okay, on the right side there's the superior vena cava from above, and from below, as I mentioned, that's the right atrium. As we can see, it's like on the right side here, and it's on the below, and the right auricle here, which we previously mentioned. Okay, so the right auricle, right atrium, superior vena cava. Right, that's so cool. For the left side, we can see here that's the pulmonary trunk. We know the pulmonary trunk goes that way, the ascending aorta goes that way, the arch. So on the left side, there's the pulmonary trunk. Beside, we can see here the left atrium and its auricle. Great, great. So again, repeat with me in exactly 1 minute the ascending aorta. So the ascending aorta begins at the level of the third left intercostal space from the aortic orifice of the left ventricle, and it ascends upwards and forwards to the right side to end at the level of the sternal angle, which is disc between T4 and 5, and we can say it at the second right sternocostal junction. Okay, all of those three are the same level, of course. The ascending aorta relations, where anteriorly it's the aortopulmonary trunk, the right auricle, the infundibulum of the left ventricle, besides the right lung and pleura. Posteriorly, we have the transverse sinus of the pericardium. We have the right pulmonary artery separating it from the right principal bronchus. That's perfect. On the right side, I can see here the superior vena cava in the right atrium and its auricle. On the left side, I can see here the left atrium and its auricle beside the pulmonary trunk itself, which goes to the left side. The ascending aorta give me the two coronaries. The right coronary artery is from, obviously, the anterior aortic sinus, and the left coronary is from the left posterior aortic sinus. Okay, again, so left coronary, left posterior aortic sinus, right coronary, anterior aortic sinus. This is everything concerning the ascending aorta. For the arch of the aorta, I really made something cool here. I hope you really enjoyed it and I hope it's beneficial. For the arch of the aorta, as I previously mentioned, the ascending aorta ended at the level of the sternal angle, which we can see it here. It ended at the second right sternocostal junction, and it went all the way upwards, backwards, and to the left, and then it descended downwards, backwards to the left as well, and it still ended at the level of the sternal angle. We say that it begins at the level of the second sternocostal junction, going upwards, backwards, and to the left side, and then downwards to the left side as well, backwards as well, to go to like a disc between T4 and 5, where we call it the sternal angle. That's a part where you need to know about the level of the sternal angle. And now we're going to talk relations of the arch of the aorta. So the first thing of the relations of the arch of the aorta is what's above. So first thing you're going to know for the arch of the aorta, the first thing is the origin from above, the relations of the above part, is the origin of the three main branches that the arch of the aorta gives. Left subclavian, left common carotid, and brachiocephalic trunk, which then give me right subclavian and right common carotid and right subclavian. But that's not the point. Forget about that. Okay, and there is like a huge vein going on that side. I didn't really want to draw it, and it then like goes with that vein, and they both together go to make something called the superior vena cava to go pour into the here into the right atrium. So again, that's the left brachiocephalic vein, which like unites with the right brachiocephalic vein, giving me the superior vena cava, which pours into the right atrium. Forget about that. Okay. Yeah. So again, the left brachiocephalic vein going on the upper border, the origin of the three main branches. Okay, what about the relations in the concavity and stuff of the arch of the aorta? That is the concavity. First thing is that the concavity of the aorta is the site for the bifurcation of the pulmonary trunk. Here's the pulmonary trunk, where it bifurcates. Where did it bifurcate? I'm sorry for that. In the concavity of the arch of the aorta. The bifurcation is exactly the arch of the aorta, but I didn't really draw accurately, okay? That's the first thing. And since you mentioned the pulmonary trunk, please mention what connects the pulmonary trunk and the arch of the aorta. Oh, that's the ligamentum arteriosum. There is a very, very, very important part, a very important nerve here, which is the left recurrent laryngeal nerve going that way. Okay, so that's the third one, beside the left principal bronchus. Left principal bronchus is very important. Where I was like solving a few days ago, and I forgot the left principal bronchus, and the question was enumerate what's the relations of the concavity of the arch of the aorta, and I really forgot that fourth one. I wrote it 100 times left principal bronchus, and then on the other line left principal bronchus 100 times, and I never forgot it since then. There is a plexus that I really couldn't draw because, accurately, it's called the superficial cardiac plexus. It's still in the concavity here as well, but I really couldn't really draw it, but consider it here. So again, how to remember the relations of the concavity of the arch of the aorta. First thing, it's the pulmonary trunk where it's bifurcating, and since you're talking bifurcation here, please tell me what connects that trunk to the arch. Oh, it's the ligamentum arteriosum. One thing you need to know, that any site of bifurcation has a plexus. Is that a rule? No, but it will help you in the exam. That's not a rule, okay? But since the site of the bifurcation of the pulmonary trunk did have the superficial cardiac plexus, keep that in mind because we'll say another bifurcation with another plexus. Right, and the last one, remember that I wrote it 100 times, so don't do like me and write it 100 times. It's the left principal bronchus. What is it? The left principal bronchus. So again, what are the superficial, the above relations of, sorry, I really did not sleep, the above relations of the arch of the aorta, the root of the first three branches, the left brachiocephalic vein, the concavity, there's the pulmonary trunk bifurcation, and since we're talking pulmonary trunk, what connects it with the arch? Oh, it's the ligamentum arteriosum. Since we're talking bifurcation, then there's definitely a plexus. What is that plexus? Superficial cardiac plexus. Never forget the left principal bronchus, as I did. And the last one is very important, which is the left recurrent laryngeal. And if you forgot that, then you forgot the whole anatomy. Okay? The left recurrent laryngeal is the third wheel. Oh, third wheel. Oh, keep in mind that the left recurrent laryngeal is the only thing that separates the trachea and esophagus. The trachea and esophagus are so intact together. They're a good couple, and they're like the trachea and esophagus. They're always like with each other. Okay, the trachea right behind it is the esophagus. The only thing that separates them apart, a way that the trachea may die and bifurcate and stuff, the only thing that separates them is the left recurrent laryngeal. So if you ever forgot that nerve, then remember that you forgot anatomy. Okay? Never forget that. Okay, so since we're gonna now talk about the posterior relations. Oh, what are the posterior relations? As you can see here, the posterior relations of the aortic arch. The first thing, it's like the right posterior. It's not just really posterior, it's the right posterior. The first thing, as you can see here, it's the trachea. And since we're talking trachea, the trachea bifurcates, and when there's a rule, what is that rule? Anything that bifurcates has a plexus. What is that plexus? Oh, it's the deep cardiac plexus. I wanted to draw it here, but it was like not a good plexus at all. Okay, so first thing, on the right posterior side, it's the trachea. And since it bifurcated, then it had a plexus. What is that plexus? It's the posterior cardiac plexus. Great. The trachea has something behind, that is the esophagus. What is the only thing that separates those couple apart? Oh, it's the left recurrent laryngeal. And what's behind the esophagus? It's the thoracic duct. It's behind the left border of the esophagus. So basically this is how I memorize it. Again, what's the first thing? I just memorized the trachea, and the trachea bifurcates. So since it bifurcated, it gave me a plexus. What is that plexus? Posterior pulmonary, I'm sorry, it's the deep cardiac plexus. Who's the couple of the trachea? Oh, it's the esophagus. What's the only thing that separated the trachea and esophagus apart? Oh, it was the left recurrent laryngeal. And what's behind the esophagus? Oh, that's the thoracic duct behind the left border. Perfect. Now we're going to talk about the left anterior relations. I didn't really draw that because it's not important. No, it's important in the exam, but it has no site here. But who's that? Like, no, that's common sense, but who's that? You know, I always say I'm gonna draw a cute organ, and since I ever said that, whenever I say that, you should know that I'm gonna draw the lung. Here's the lung with the cardiac notch, all good. So the first thing that is on the left anterior aspect is the lung with its mediastinal aspect. Here's on the mediastinal aspect here. Yeah, you know, the mediastinal, it has the cardiac impression, that has the esophageal and the cardiac impression, it has the the arch of the aorta impression, the descending thoracic aorta, the esophagus, all those stuff are like impressions on the hilum of on the mediastinal surface of the lung. So the first thing on the left anterior aspect is the lung and the mediastinal surface, okay, of it, and with its impressions and stuff. Okay, then what's like really left anterior? Okay, there are these structures that cross the arch of the aorta, and I don't really remember them that way. I just remember the first one. Okay, who is like the master of passing in front of the hilum? That's the phrenic. The phrenic was the one in front of the hilum. Okay, so the first one I memorized is the phrenic nerve, which passes in front of the hilum of the lung, and then its brother, that's the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve gave a branch called the inferior cervical cardiac branch. And since we mentioned the word inferior, we should mention its brother as well, which is the word superior, or its sister, whatsoever. Okay, so it's the superior, no cardiac here, it's just the superior cervical branch, and that's from the sympathetic chain. How to make short about that? Superior from the sympathetic. Superior with an S, with a sympathetic with an S. But the vagus gave the inferior. Great, and the last one, which is the superior intercostal nerve. Anything that crosses the arch of the aorta is a nerve. Never say anything else. So again, the relations quickly. First thing, on the above, that's the brachiocephalic vein and the three main branches. On the concavity, first thing is the pulmonary trunk. What relates it with the arch? Oh, that's the ligamentum arteriosum. Since we're talking bifurcation, then there's a plexus. What's that plexus? Superficial cardiac plexus. Great. Something with an L again. That's the left principal bronchus. And what's the last thing? It's the left recurrent laryngeal nerve. It's the only thing that separated the trachea and esophagus. Great. And then we're going to talk about the posterior right posterior aspect. First thing is the trachea, and that's common sense because the trachea had a constriction on its lower part by the arch of the aorta. Okay, so it's definitely on the right posterior part. So the trachea. Who's the couple of the trachea? That's the esophagus. Who's the only thing that separated the trachea and esophagus? That's the left recurrent laryngeal. Since the trachea bifurcated, it definitely gave a plexus. Who's that plexus? That's the deep cardiac plexus. And since we mentioned the esophagus, who's behind the esophagus? That's the thoracic duct behind the left border of the esophagus. Now we're going to talk about the left anterior aspect. Who are they? Oh, I'm going to mention them. First thing is the lung pleura with the mediastinal surface. Who's the king of passing in front of the hilum? The hilum is the king of the mediastinal surface of the lung. Okay, who's the king of passing in front of the hilum? Oh, that's the phrenic. So now we're going to talk about the structures crossing the arch. All of them are nerves. Don't forget that. So the first thing is that king, which is the phrenic nerve. Who's its brother? It's the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve gave a branch called the inferior cervical cardiac branch. And then, since we mentioned the word it's inferior, then definitely there is a superior cervical branch. That's from the sympathetic chain. Never forget that. Superior cervical cardiac branch. Oh, I got mixed up. It's superior cervical cardiac branch. No, superior cervical branch. I'm so sorry. Great. Superior cervical cardiac branch from the sympathetic chain, although the inferior cervical cardiac branch is from the vagus. Inferior, vagus, superior sympathetic, superior sympathetic, superior sympathetic. Right, the last thing is superior intercostal nerve. This is for the relations. All done. The branches of the arch of the aorta, left subclavian, left common carotid, and brachiocephalic trunk. The part of the clinical point, which is the aortic rotation and the aortic aneurysm, are easy. So read them. If you need anything, text me. Okay, now we're going to talk about the descending thoracic aorta. The descending thoracic aorta is the continuation of the arch of the aorta, which begins at like the disc between T4 and 5. Here's it, that's number 5. Okay, and it's in between. Okay, disc between T4 and 5, and it then like goes first thing to the left of those 3, as you can see them, to the left of those 3 vertebrae, and then it descends in front of the lower 5 thoracic vertebrae from T8 till T12. Great, and it leaves the thorax by by the aortic opening of the diaphragm, and by the way, it's about 8 inches long, and that's so tall. Great. So again, the descending thoracic aorta begins at the disc between T4 and 5, and that's the sternal angle. Descends like first thing to the left of T5, 6, and 7, and then in front of from T8 till T12. It leaves the thorax by the aortic opening of the diaphragm to become the abdominal aorta, and the thoracic aorta is about 8 inches long. Great. What about the relations? First thing, we were going to talk about anterior relations. Anterior relations, we have 4 items. First thing, pericardium, and that's super sense, because here's, this first thing is the pericardium, which surrounds the heart. Right, the diaphragm, because there's no such thing as the aortic opening of the diaphragm. It doesn't pierce the diaphragm. It's just like a place and like an already. Oh, I want to say that if that's the this is what I mean. Like the aorta passes somewhere here. The diaphragm is like incomplete posterior. I cannot really like explain that, but if these are the vertebra, let me draw that in a cool way. If that's the vertebra, those 3. Oh, guys, I take a lot of time drawing those things. That's the like T12. There's the diaphragm here. It has here the transverse process. There's the diaphragm here, like this part is already empty, and then the diaphragm continues, making this part right copula, left copula, and then it goes here. But this part is like making an empty hole, and it continues here. It's like that part here makes like a foramen. That's the aortic opening. Great. I hope that's clear. Okay, so the aortic opening. So the first thing, pericardium, esophagus. There's also the pericardium, left bronchus. So the first thing, left bronchus, pericardium, esophagus, and diaphragm. Left bronchus, pericardium, esophagus, and diaphragm. And I have no idea why didn't I draw the esophagus, the bronchus. But here's it. Don't be sad. What's that font? Okay. The trachea bifurcates at the level of the sternal angle. Now here's the sternal angle. Give me one, doom. Okay, so the first thing, here's it. The left bronchus, pericardium, esophagus, and diaphragm. left bronchus, pericardium, esophagus, and diaphragm. Okay, and then what are the posterior relations? They are definitely the lower 5 thoracic vertebrae, besides the superior and inferior hemiazygous veins. For the right side, there's the esophagus as well. Here's the esophagus, here's on the right side, and here it's like anterior. Here it's on the left side, so never forget that. The esophagus deviates at the level of T7 to leave the thorax at T10 through the esophageal opening. Great. So before T7 it's on the right side. When it's deviating it's posterior. After deviation it's on the left side. Great. So the upper part is to the right, the lower part is to the left. Great. Here we've got the left lung and pleura, and that's the cardiac notch, and of course the esophagus. So again, relations of the descending thoracic aorta. First thing, anterior. Anterior we've got the esophagus, diaphragm, left principal bronchus, and pericardium. Posterior we've got the lower 5 thoracic vertebrae, and the superior and inferior hemiazygous veins. These ones, superior hemiazygous, inferior hemiazygous. For the right side, we've got the esophagus on the upper part, besides the thoracic duct. The thoracic duct is like behind the left border of the esophagus. So we have the thoracic duct and the esophagus. On the left side, we've got the esophagus as well, but on the lower part, besides the left lung and pleura. Great. What are the branches? It gives me about from number 3 to number 11 from the posterior intercostal arteries, which anastomose later with the anterior, but that's not the point. It gives me about 4 to 5 esophageal branches. It gives me the subcostal branches. It gives me about 2 bronchial for the left lung. I'm sorry. Besides, it gives to the mediastinum, pericardium, and diaphragm. So, as promised, we're gonna make it a revision for the arteries, DVD themed. Great. First thing was the internal intercostal artery, which begins at the level of the 1 inch above the sternal endoclavicle, and then it enters through the thoracic inlet. That passes, of course, behind the sternal endoclavicle, and it goes like half an inch from the lateral border sternum, and behind the upper 6 costal cartilages. It ends in the 6th intercostal space, giving me the musculophrenic and the superior epigastric. This is like the course, the branches. That's the word spam. Spam, S, superior epigastric, P, pericardial, sternal, and mediastinal. P again. These are the perforating branches for 2, 3, and 4. They're rising to pierce the internal intercostal, the anterior intercostal membrane, and the pectoralis major. They go to supply the medial aspect of the mammary gland. And P again is the pericardiacophrenic. Pericardiacal for pericardium. Phrenic means diaphragm. Besides, they give the parietal pleura. Please don't forget that the perforating branches should be ligated during a mastectomy, not to cause internal hemorrhage. For the A, it's the anterior intercostal arteries, where it gives for the upper 6 intercostal spaces, 2 for each, one in the upper part, another on the lower part, and both of them anastomoses in the end with the posterior intercostal artery corresponding to it and its collateral. A, and then M, it's the musculophrenic artery. That's one of the terminals. It goes behind the 7th rib, to give also to intercostals, to interior intercostals, for that also anastomoses with the corresponding posterior intercostal and its collateral. And then for the aorta, the ascending aorta begins at the level of the 3rd left intercostal space from the aortic orifice of the left ventricle. It then goes upwards, forwards, and to the right side, to end at the level of the sternal angle or we should say it the second right sternocostal junction. The relations of the I forgot mentioning the relations of the internal thoracic artery. I'm sorry. For the internal thoracic artery, I said there's something missing. Anterior relations, they're so easy. First thing is the sternal and the clavicle, and then the upper six intercostal cartilages. What's the intervening the intercostal spaces, which is the internal intercostal anterior intercostal membrane, and the last thing is like the brachiocephalic veins. Don't forget the phrenic nerve. What's on the sides of it? We do have something called the two vein accommodants. Okay, these vein accommodants unite together, giving me something called the internal thoracic artery, internal thoracic vein. I'm sorry, and that internal thoracic vein is on the medial side. And don't forget as well as the parasternal lymph nodes. These parasternal lymph nodes are also medial, because parasternal means like you're just beside the sternum. Great. Anything else? Oh yeah, deep relations. We have the lung apex and the pleura. Now again, to continue with the ascending aorta, I'm sorry for that. For the ascending aorta, the relations that the relations anteriorly, there is the infundibulum of the left ventricle. The root of the pulmonary trunk, we can see it here. It's the right auricle. Never forget the right pleura, right lung and pleura, of course. And for the posterior relations, it's the transverse sinus of the pericardium. The transverse sinus of the pericardium and the right pulmonary artery, which separates it from the right principal bronchus. On the right side, there is the superior vena cava from above, and the right atrium and its auricle from below. On the left side, there is the left atrium and its auricle from above, and there is the pulmonary trunk from below. Pulmonary trunk from above, and the left atrium is below. I'm sorry, I got mixed up. And then there's the branches. It's the right and left coronaries. The right coronary from the anterior aortic sinus, left coronary from the left posterior aortic sinus. We're gonna talk arch of the aorta. Arch of the aorta. What's happening here? First thing, it begins from the sternal angle on the right side to the sternal angle of the left side. Always remember that diagram. From the second right sternocostal junction, going upwards, backwards, and to the left side, then downwards to the left side as well. That's the arch of the aorta. To end at the disc between T4 and 5. The relations for it. First thing is the main from above are the main three arteries that it gives: left common carotid, left subclavian, and brachiocephalic trunk. From above there is the left brachiocephalic vein. In the concavity there is the pulmonary trunk, and since it bifurcates, then it has a superficial cardiac plexus. Please tell me what relates or connects the pulmonary trunk with the arch of the aorta. Oh, that's the ligamentum arteriosum with an L again, left principal bronchus with an L again. We're going to talk left recurrent laryngeal. Never forget the left recurrent laryngeal is the only thing that separates the trachea and esophagus apart. Great. After that, we're going to talk about the right posterior aspect. First thing, by common sense, it's the trachea, because actually the trachea has a constriction by the aortic arch, so it's definitely on the right side. So the trachea, since it bifurcated, then it definitely made a plexus. What's that plexus? The deep cardiac plexus. Who's the couple of the trachea? Oh, that's the esophagus. What's the only thing that separates them apart? It's the left recurrent laryngeal. What's behind the left border of the esophagus? That's the thoracic duct. Anterior and to the left, first thing, it's the left lung and pleura. mediastinal surface, of course. Now we're going to talk about the structures that cross the arch of the aorta. Who's the king that passes in front of the hilum of the lung? That's the phrenic nerve. Who's its brother? That's the vagus. The vagus gave a branch called inferior cervical cardiac branch. Since we said inferior, then we're going to talk superior. Superior from the sympathetic chain. Superior cervical cardiac branch from the sympathetic chain. Right. Last thing is the superior intercostal nerve. Go to the branches. Yeah, left subclavian, left common carotid, brachiocephalic trunk. Now the last thing is the descending thoracic aorta, which begins at the level of a disc between T4 and 5, which is, by the way, the sternal angle. It goes firstly on the left side of those T5, T6, and T7 thoracic vertebrae, and then it goes in front of the lower 5 thoracic vertebrae, leaves the thorax through the aortic opening of the diaphragm. When it leaves them, the first thing that is, we're talking relations here. So the anterior relations, first thing is the left principal bronchus, the pericardium, the esophagus, and diaphragm. Don't forget, the esophagus is deviating. When it's deviating, the first thing it deviates to the level of D7. So above D7, we're on the right side. So, okay, below T7, we're on the left side. And we're posterior when we're deviating, and we're anterior when we're deviating. I'm sorry, it's anterior. Okay, so sorry, I did not sleep. Okay, so again, first thing, to the right side, that's the esophagus. From the upper part, from the lower part, it's still the esophagus, but it's on the left side. Okay, and the level of T7, that's the esophagus deviating anteriorly. Okay, so again, what are the anterior relations? Oh, that's the esophagus, diaphragm, left principal bronchus, and what did I not say? That's the pericardium. And for the right side relations, first thing, esophagus. As I said, and the thoracic duct, esophagus and thoracic duct. Posteriorly, these are the lower 5 thoracic vertebrae, superior and inferior hemiazygous veins. On the left side, there's the left lung and pleura. Don't forget, that's the esophagus on the lower part. What are the branches of the descending thoracic aorta? Oh, they are so important. 45 esophageal, 2 bronchial for the left lung, about pericardial, mediastinal, and diaphragmatic. There are 9 pairs for the posterior intercostal arteries, 1 subcostal. Don't forget, the posterior intercostal arteries is from intercostal space number 3 to intercostal space number 11. Best of luck.